Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an honor. It's always an honor to broadcast this show and to try to inform what's going on in Mexico, both in English and in Spanish. But like I said at the beginning of the show, this weekend is particularly important and interesting because we may be on the verge of a different political system in Mexico. And we can debate whether the reforms that were proposed and approved this week, including the justice reform, the very controversial justice reform, we can debate it. But it's just in terms of how democracies are supposed to work, it's not this way. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting a lot of questions are going to be raised in terms of what this reform means in the long term. Joining us today is Eddie Varon. He is a human rights litigator, and he also is an international litigator. He's been on the show before. I know, Eddie, you've been following the reforms very, very closely, trying to understand, like all of us, not only what is the context or the content of the reforms, but what does this mean for Mexico in the long term, and is it possible to implement the reforms the way it has been proposed? So let's not talk necessarily about the process by which these reforms were approved. I think we have to start talking about the content, because there just seems to be, I think we need to recognize that these reforms are going to it's going to happen. They're going to try to, Eddie, to try to implement some type of process by which judges are going to be elected next year. So why don't you and I brainstorm how this process is going to be? Let's start with, what does this reform include? It includes the election of judges.
Correct.
It includes faceless judges. What else, Eddie? By the way, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ana Maria, to you and your watchers always. You are correct. It includes, amongst other things, a term of 6 months maximum to get your judgment instead of being delayed. But probably one of the most important that nobody's talking about is what I call the Saint Inquisitional Tribunal, the discipline, because they're going to be beholding. Let me give you an example. You get, under the law, you get a judgment in your favor. People appeal it. You get it. You go to amparo. And then, because if it's against the government, there's no way that this tribunal is going to say, no, that goes against the public welfare, but it's against the law. Well, but if you do it, we're going to remove you.
But why don't we talk about this, what you're calling this Inquisitional Tribunal? Are we talking about this special group, this new group, or this new tribunal that's being created, that is going to be reviewing all the judges' decisions? Or in general, are we talking about judges who are more likely than not to have some kind of link to the official party or to the government?
Yes.
Because they are going to be pretty much inclined.
They're going to be beholden like a slate of candidates, and they're going to say, I owe it to the party, not to you. But the problem is that hypothetically, there's going to be a clash and a lot of litigation. Let me tell you why. For example, nobody touched the retroactive clause of the Constitution. So if nobody attacked it, how can you make it retroactive and fire everybody? They're going to go back and modify it? Because if you got two provisions, and you know that as a great lawyer that you are, Ana Maria, you got to harmonize it, okay? So you cannot say it goes from here on, not going behind. That's number one.
But what does that mean? Just give me a case exactly.
Well,
what do you mean that it lacks retroactivity?
No, you cannot touch me because the Constitution says that you cannot apply retroactively law against me, even if it's in the Constitution. So it would go from here henceforth, not behind me.
Does that include the election of judges? I mean, the
I
judges, I mean,
believe
what happens?
it includes, I think, everybody who's sitting as a judge who's not retired. So there's a lot of talk about that. Then you bring it the free trade agreement, where it guarantees,
Mhm.
independence of judges. And then in
Right,
top of that, this discipline tribunal would go hypothetically above the Mexican Supreme Court from all
right.
people. So,
Yeah.
it,
You
they
know,
did it. Look, they did it on their knees in a hurry. And talk of the
right.
town is so no judge extradites nobody from organized crime. But I got news for
That
them.
was,
Ain't gonna
yeah.
happen. I mean, if the US wants, they're gonna go pluck somebody and take him, as the guy in New York found
Well,
out today.
yeah. Well, the let's talk briefly about this discipline tribunal that I think there has been very little there hasn't been a lot of conversation about this discipline tribunal. You're absolutely right. It can go above any decision made by the Supreme Court. The discipline tribunal is an independent tribunal. I think there's supposed to be 5 magistrates,
Right?
and
Independent,
they
quote
basic
unquote.
independent quote, and they will be elected, I believe. They will basically decide whether a judge's decision was the correct decision, or whether somehow this judge violated some ethical, some criminal, or
Or the
misuse.
well-being of the people, according to the four
Or
transformation. What's the
yeah,
well-being? Nothing against the government. The government can do no wrong, which is the antithesis of democracy. Plus,
yeah.
we have another constitutional problem nobody's talking about. Look, the Federal Administrative Tribunal was not touched. Military tribunals were not touched. Agricultural agrarian reform tribunals were not touched. Hence, where does that leave us? The
Mm-hmm,
Constitution of Mexico prohibits special tribunals, which is what this exact thing would prohibit.
mm-hmm,
Then, on top of that, you got labor tribunals pursuant to the side agreements with the free trade agreement, which are allowed,
mm-hmm,
specifically the special courts. You go
mm-hmm,
against that because the tribunal says, no, you're also breaching the free trade agreement. Whichever
mm-hmm.
way you want to see it, it's going to be a headache.
Well, reforms, big changes always contain big headaches. I mean, I think that's not, I mean, that's, I don't think the problem is the difficulty of its implementation. I think the issue is, is it a viable
I
reform?
don't
I
think
mean,
so.
you know, but what does that mean? Because I was looking at the requirements for the judges who are going to be possible candidates. They basically only have to need a law degree, 5 years of undefined judicial area experience. So that
And a
means
grade of
that they could,
8.
right, they could have had an internship while they were getting their law degree, and a letter of recommendation from anyone,
From
so
a
that they can
neighbor.
run and be a judge from their neighbor.
Ana Maria is
or
a very
and
nice girl. I like her, it's an example, of course. Already comes
eh,
and helps me with the groceries.
well, that probably those letters are going to come from the political operators
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
from that community. So that, I think, in itself, it's kind of reducing the level of experience that is currently required for someone to be a judge. That's why the that's why they had all these protests of
That is
officials
correct.
who work for the judges, because they were the natural pool of lawyers that were supposed to become judges in the
Yes.
next decade, literally. And
There's
they're not
another issue
finding,
as well, Ana
yeah,
Maria, if I may delve a little bit in it. There's 4 stays for this to happen. So
amparos.
hypothetically, amparos, but you're right, but not even the amparo. definite stay, which is a suspensiones, just stays.
Uh-huh.
And they did it against it. So what I'm telling some people, because I already got 2 congressmen calling me saying, hey, what do you think will happen? And I told them, I told you, look, it's very simple. You committed a crime, even if you're not convicted, and you have your wonderful US visa, that's going to be revoked. And also,
Really?
oh yeah, oh hell yeah. I mean, I was looking at the chapter specifically that says either convicted of a crime, even if it's a foreign crime, and or if you admit to elements of a crime or conduct 1 year or more. Look, if you
Uh-huh.
violate a stay, it's a crime.
Huh.
It's
So
straight
when so when
forward.
so when all these congressmen and women, senators apply for a visa to travel to the United States, if they're going to have to say that they technically committed a crime if they
That's
voted
correct. You got
to
Ricardo
participate. Wow.
Monreal saying, I know that it's not right and it's a crime, but I don't care. But, all that blah, blah, blah,
Right.
good demagoguery. And there's a case here, for example, I was reading, which is the Treasury targets transnational corruption.
Right.
And it has
Right.
to be with different things. You know this law more than anybody else.
Yeah.
So there's a
Yeah.
thing called
Okay.
parliamentary corruption. Isn't that great? And this has to do with two brothers who pay money or things of value or benefit to people, the Ramani brothers, for elections. And if they won, they would get contracts, etc.
Right.
They
Right.
got the visas stripped, plus the
hmm
assets, plus, I think, committing crimes.
So your position is that they are possibly, in addition, well, let's just put the corruptions issue aside,
Aside.
but the fact that they are that they may, by voting this law, which had a stay by several judges, they may have committed a crime. But I mean, what is the likelihood that this is going to be overturned? I mean, they are trying to figure out a way to bring it up to the Mexican Supreme Court so that it's discussed there. It just it seems unlikely that there is a way of justifying some type of habeas corpus or some type of discussion or debate at the Supreme Court, arguing that this constitutional reform is unconstitutional. You know what I mean?
Well, it's unconventional, violates treaties now. And there's going to be a clash on many fronts. Let me give you
hmm
one example. What's going to happen? There's going to be lawsuits filed in the United States. The very first thing the Mexican government is going to cry and say, oh no, forum non-convenience, right? We can try it
Right.
in Mexico. The very first thing I'm going to do, but the very first thing I'm going to tell a judge, what forum
hmm
non-convenience? There's no judicial independence. No U.S. judge is going to say, not one
Right.
U.S. judge is going to say, you're wrong, Eddie. It's going to stay there.
hmm
When we start getting judgments against it, and look, it happened with Poland. I don't know if you know this case. The
Which
extreme
one?
right in Poland came in, did a disciplinary tribunal, wanted to appoint, elect them. The European Union told him, you cannot do that. You're breaching what the European Union stands for.
The
Well, my
agreement. Yeah.
constitution. And then the first thing
Right.
they said, we don't care. The European Court of Justice said, your constitution can be yours, but that's not an excuse to breach the UN
hmm
treaty. You could go in, I'm going to fine you 1 million euros a day, which you did a month, plus you're going to be applied Article 7. We're going to kick you out. There was a big fuss. The new administration came in and said, no, 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 don't kick us out. And look,
hmm
I hate to say it, but I think Poland being in NATO, it's much more important to the US, certainly,
hmm
and to Europe, that part of Mexico. Now,
Right.
if you add that with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights,
Yeah.
that they said you cannot have, it's prohibited, with a new system of
hmm
justice, you have to know who you judge. You cannot have, as it is, the Mexican government is charging everybody with organized crime where they cannot charge them with anything else. And you don't know who your judge
hmm
is going to be. Moral of the story. So how you going to elect somebody when you're going to have to
Well,
see who the guy is, and then you're not going to know who he is? It's BS. That's what it is.
yeah, I know because I was working in Colombia when they implemented the faceless judges and faceless prosecutors, and it's unworkable. I can understand why they want to have these special systems, but special jurisdictions, but it doesn't work. And in this case, in addition to having faceless judges, or this constitutional reform allowing for faceless judges, the judges who are supposed to be faceless are going to be elected, and that's the insane part of this whole process.
Yeah.
The other part, which I think is interesting, is they're only talking about federal judges, magistrates, and justices of the Supreme Court. They're not talking about local judges,
No,
although they are
it is.
encouraging. Well, they're encouraging judicial reforms at the local level,
More than
and a state has
encouragement,
to
is
make.
mandatory within 3 to 4 years in the system. Also, I mean, it's going to be unworkable. But here's another one that nobody has noticed, and you're going to love this one, and so are your viewers. Mexico sued as a state the United
Uh-huh,
States in the Avena case in the World Court, in the
right,
ICJ. And the very first thing the United States of America said is, Mexico signs treaties left and right and doesn't comply with them. So
right.
the ICJ gave the reason, judgment against the US specifically, and for Mexico, saying you cannot use a treaty, I mean, your constitution, to breach a treaty, or you're going to have an international, obligation here. You're going to be
Hmm.
breach of an international obligation. There's still 46 Mexicans, okay, on death row or going
Hmm.
through the death penalty appeals. I want to see all these congressmen from from the states where there's that, telling their people how they're going to put them in jeopardy of the death penalty. Because if I'm a governor of Oklahoma, whatever, I'm going to say, guess what? Mexico's breaching what we got. It's
Yeah,
called teoría de los actos
agreement.
propios.
Right. So I hadn't even thought that through, because Mexico is clearly breaching some of their international responsibilities, international agreements. So as they are breaching these international agreements, it allows other countries, in this case the United States, to breach any agreement, or not respect an agreement that they may have with Mexico,
Ecuador, the
because
lawsuit
Mexico,
of Mexico against Ecuador. It's not going to go
right.
anywhere. I mean, they do things and they don't. I won 25 years ago, you may remember, at the consulate level in the U.S. District Court, for example, the bilateral
Hmm.
treaty. And I can
Right.
see them going back and saying, no, we don't care about the treaties. Go back and tell that to your voters. That's great.
So what what does this mean in terms of the implementation of the law in Mexico? Because at the end of the day, this government and the future government of President Claudia Sheinbaum may just basically say, we don't care. We don't care about international agreements. We don't
Okay.
care what the rest of the world thinks.
Okay.
What we care is that judges, I think this is the argument they're going to use, are more responsive to the people's needs.
Well, they're
So let's
not.
talk about the people. Well, let's
Okay.
talk about the people's needs. I mean, is it feasible to have elections of judges the way that they are describing in
No,
this
no,
in
it
this
is not. You know
reform?
that because they were saying you elect them in the States. You very well know. No U.S. federal judge, whether it's district court, appeals court, or
Hmm.
whatever, it's there. Now, there's something I need to say and address, if you allow me, Ana Maria.
Yeah,
Claudia Sheinbaum tried to slow down a little bit because she looked at the peso
right.
and saying, we're going to do treaties for nearshoring. Now she's seeing that. Now, if Mexico wants to get isolated, I want to see when the U.S. says no more treaty. And there's a congressional resolution. It took place 2 days ago. You know that? In the House, all of it, saying we are concerned. People don't get the messages. The U.S. congressman don't say either you do it or I can see it next year when it gets time to revise the free trade agreement. how much is Mexico's going to lose? How much? And whoever's the president, they're not going to allow China to just come in here and waltz around. Then you have on top of that, the European Union, we signed that clause, the democratic clause that they're breaching. So are we going to pick fights and breach treaties all over? Tell that to your people when they can, it's going to be worse than Venezuela.
You know, nobody has talking about the democratic clause in all commercial agreements, or most of them, have something called the democratic clause that basically the countries signing these agreements are promising that they're going to respect what is considered to be
Here's one
basic
more for you,
democratic.
because you worked
Right.
on this, and I'm sure you thought about it. In the old days, the Merida Initiative, remember?
Right.
Okay. The Merida Initiative in those days,
Mhm.
how much did the United States to capacitate trained judges? More than $6-7 billion. Are you
Yeah.
gonna train everybody again? Because if I'm a
Yeah.
US taxpayer, I'm gonna say, hell
Yeah.
no.
So let's do this. We're still trying to understand what even remotely how they're going to implement this reform, and whether there is any way that this reform may be. I don't think we can say canceled, but at least postponed its implementation. So let's do this, Eddie. It's always great to have you on the show. You got to return soon, Eddie Varon. He is a international litigator, human rights litigator. It's always great to have you here on
Thank
Living
you,
in
Ana
Mexico.
Maria. I
Thank you so much.
appreciate it, and I thank you. Take care. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Let's go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and watching Living in Mexico. Don't go away. I'll be right back.
¿Me la mandas después, la liga?
Sí, espera,
Ok,
déjame cerrar aquí un segundo.
sí.